Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is September 29th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all enjoyed your weekend. So on Friday, we had part one of the Whistleblower Complaint Department. We are going to continue with part two during today's episode. Again, there is 4 parts to the whistleblower's official complaint, including an appendix. We are going to attempt here on today's podcast to make it through the remainder of this complaint, at least parts 3 and 4, and if we have time, we'll also go through the appendix. But I just want to say, because it is Sunday, because we had the morning political talk shows, everybody was making the rounds. The people who were out there defending the president, many people from within his administration, senators, congressmen, going out there, coming to his defense, saying this is, again, another political hoax, another witch hunt, that this is hearsay on part of the whistleblower. There's no reason why this should even be deemed credible. However, from what we know, from what we read earlier last week, we also took the time to go through the Office of Inspector General's report of the intelligence community and said, well, look, according to our preliminary review, we do believe that there is an indicia of political bias on behalf of this whistleblower. And the Inspector General knows the identity of the whistleblower. But given our preliminary review, despite the fact that there is some semblance of political bias, we still believe that the whistleblower's complaint is an urgent matter and it appears credible. So they continued forward with the process. And here we are today, and this is continuing. Again, there was no surprise that this was going to be front page news, that this was going to be front and center on this morning's talk show programs. And obviously there were some heated battles back and forth between various programs, CNN, CBS, Fox News, with various people, senators, congressmen, and advisors to the president, who were doing their best to defend him and trying to deflect and trying to put this on Joe Biden. So again, what we've been saying here for a long time, absent this complaint, just in general, you have this country divided. You have everybody siloed in. If you think Donald Trump is guilty, if you do not like Donald Trump, this is what you've been waiting for. You didn't get it for the past 2-3 years with the Bob Mueller investigation, the whole Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy. You didn't get it, but now you think you got him. So you love this. Many people on the left, they love this. They've been waiting for this. This is now round 2, round 3. They think they finally got him. Okay? If you're somebody who's on the right or you support Donald Trump, you're thinking, oh no, this is just another witch hunt. This is another political hoax from the Democrats. Can't have it, cannot stand it. And this isn't Donald Trump. This is, once again, the Democrats projecting on Donald Trump that which they are guilty. And here they're calling out by name Joe Biden and his son, Hunter Biden, and some dealings that were going on between Ukraine, and now they're throwing China into the mix as well. And we're talking a lot of money here, folks. So this isn't going away anytime soon. This is dividing the country. This is not a good thing. Impeachment is a serious process. And again, somewhat to her credit, Nancy Pelosi had put this off for a long time. I don't know what it was. She finally caved in to the pressures mounting on her from some of the radicals within her own party, or whatever the case may be. But now she is moving forward with a formal impeachment inquiry, which we are in the process of. But she's come over, and she, again, to her credit, she said this is a sad day for the United States of America. And it truly is. It truly is. Donald Trump is a duly elected president. You don't like him? Don't vote for him in 2020. That's how this is supposed to work. Because what I have seen, and another thing that we took the time to read here, at least in part, was the transcript, that phone call transcript that was released from the White House between the phone call between President Trump and President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. All right? And we said, look, Donald Trump asked for a favor. Isn't this what they do? They ask for favors all the time. That's politics. That's business. Can you do it? Now, do you like the word favor? Maybe you don't. Maybe he should have been a little bit more articulate or eloquent in how he voiced what he wanted from the president of Ukraine. But he didn't. He said, can you do me a favor? And then he also mentions Joe Biden, which to me is problematic. So there are things that I say, okay, you know what? You want to investigate this? This is fine. Nobody is above the law. That includes the president of the United States. But guess what? Joe Biden isn't either. And the mainstream media, the liberals, the Democrats, they don't get to come out and say that Joe Biden is exempt from investigation or question simply because he is the political opponent of Donald J. Trump. You don't get a free pass just because you're a political opponent. That's not how it works. Too bad. Now, the timing of all of this is suspect, and that doesn't shed a lot of good light on the president as far as I'm concerned, because Donald Trump has been talking about Ukraine. He's been talking about that U.S. cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike, which is mentioned in the complaint, and it's mentioned in the transcript as well. So he's talking about, look, there's some corruption going on that we believe in Ukraine. It's surrounding Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden. And can you help my personal attorney, former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, and current Attorney General Bill Barr, get on the phone with them and talk details, because we'd like to get to the bottom of this, because I think it's a bad thing. It very well could be a bad thing, but Donald Trump has been talking about this for quite a while. Why has he waited until he's in the middle of his next presidential campaign to ask this question of Ukraine? That, to me, is suspect, because that does not shed a good light on the president. Now it gives the possibility that this is politically motivated, at least in part, because Joe Biden right now is the front runner, or at least he's jockeying for a position between him and Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts. And in pretty much all polls, Donald Trump is losing to pretty much all of the main candidates right now, but it's so early, I don't want to go down that road. But nevertheless, Donald Trump pays attention to this. He doesn't like it. And so now it gives the appearance that this could be politically motivated. Now, if Donald Trump had had previous conversations with the former administration in Ukraine and was trying to get to the bottom of this before, then you could say, look, this is just continuation. We have a new administration in Ukraine. These calls were congratulatory in nature, exchanging pleasantries, trying to form a rapport, trying to get on. We were just continuing business. We already had an investigation that was underway with Ukraine in partnership with the United States. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, that does not appear to be the case. So Donald Trump waits until 2019, when pretty much all of the Democratic contenders are entered into the race. Front man is Vice President Joe Biden. And now Donald Trump picks up the phone and says, hey, Ukraine, do me a favor. So it doesn't sound good. It doesn't look good. But I do not believe at this point that alone rises to an impeachable offense. You want to investigate it? I don't have any problem with that, because if there is something shady going on behind the scenes from the Trump administration, that deserves to be looked into. But do not exempt Joe Biden and his son just because he's a political opponent of Donald J. Trump. That argument to me does not hold water. He is not exempt from investigation simply because he's running for president of the United States. I'm not buying that for a second. But that seems to be one of the biggest arguments that is made from the Democrats and media talking heads who are supporting Joe Biden and continuing to go after Donald J. Trump. Okay? So let's continue on here with this whistleblower's complaint. We left off on point number 3, which is titled Ongoing Concerns, so let's continue. On 26 July, a day after the call, U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations Kurt Volcker visited Kiev and met with President Zelenskyy and a variety of Ukrainian political figures. Ambassador Volcker was accompanied in his meetings by U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland. Recall, last Friday, Ambassador Kurt Volcker resigned. So that was breaking news. There's still a lot that's waiting to be heard as to the reasons why he resigned, and I do believe he is set to testify before some congressional meetings, so stay tuned on that. Based on multiple readouts of these meetings recounted to me by various U.S. officials, Ambassadors Volcker and Sondland reportedly provided advice to the Ukrainian leadership about how to navigate the demands that the president has made of Mr. Zelenskyy. So let's stop right there. This is 26 July. This is one day after the phone call between Donald Trump and President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. And here, according to the whistleblower and the sources that he is citing, Ambassador Kurt Volcker and Ambassador Gordon Sondland were talking to the Ukrainian leadership about, quote, how to navigate the demands that the president had made of Mr. Zelenskyy. So this says to me that somebody had to have briefed these ambassadors on what the president was actually looking for. Because how would they know to even have a conversation with Ukrainian leadership, and how would they know how to navigate the demands of the president that he had made of Mr. Zelenskyy? So these are questions that are going to have to be answered, because this is one day after that phone call. So were they brought up to speed on July 25th, the day of that phone call, shortly thereafter, or was this something that was in motion beforehand? This is something that they have been working on within the White House and within the administration. So these things remain unknown, but those are questions that need to be asked. Continuing, I also learned from multiple U.S. officials that on or about 2 August, Mr. Giuliani reportedly traveled to Madrid to meet with one of President Zelensky's advisors, Andrei Yermak. The U.S. officials characterized this meeting, which was not reported publicly at the time, as a direct follow-up to the president's call with Mr. Zelenskyy about the cases that they had discussed. Separately, multiple U.S. officials told me that Mr. Giuliani had reportedly privately reached out to a variety of other Zelensky's advisors, including Chief of Staff Andrei Bodan and Acting Chairman of the Security Service of Ukraine, Ivan Bakanov. I do not know whether those officials met or spoke with Mr. Giuliani, but I was told separately by multiple U.S. officials that Mr. Yermak and Mr. Bakanov intended to travel to Washington in mid-August. So again, this whistleblower is saying that he does not have first-hand knowledge, but according to his sources and U.S. officials, that this was the case. Continuing, on 9 August, the president told reporters, quote, I think President Zelenskyy is going to make a deal with President Putin, and he will be invited to the White House. And we look forward to seeing him. He's already been invited to the White House, and he wants to come, and I think he will. He's a very reasonable guy. He wants to see peace in Ukraine, and I think he will be coming very soon, actually, end quote. Continuing with point number 4, titled Circumstances Leading Up to the 25 July Presidential Phone Call. Beginning in late March 2019, a series of articles appeared in an online publication called The Hill. In these articles, several Ukrainian officials, most notably Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko, made a series of allegations against other Ukrainian officials and current and former U.S. officials. Mr. Lutsenko and his colleagues alleged, inter alia, the following. 1. That they possessed evidence that Ukrainian officials, namely head of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Artem Stinik, and member of parliament, Sergei Lishchenko, had interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, allegedly in collaboration with the DNC and the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Secondly, that the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, specifically U.S. Ambassador Marie Jovanovic, who had criticized Mr. Lutsenko's organization for its poor record on fighting corruption, had allegedly obstructed Ukrainian law enforcement agencies' pursuit of corruption cases, including by providing a do not prosecute list, and had blocked Ukrainian prosecutors from traveling to the United States expressly to prevent them from delivering their evidence about the 2016 U.S. election. And thirdly, that former Vice President Biden had pressured former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko in 2016 to fire then-Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin in order to quash a purported criminal probe into Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian energy company on whose board the former vice president's son, Hunter, sat. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of names out there, but I just want to make sure that we get through this. Further analysis and, in my opinion, on what all of this means will come throughout the rest of this week. So again, you can find this online, and I ask that you do so because get the facts, take the time to read it. It's not that long, but you're only going to get tidbits on Fox News. You're only going to get tidbits on CNN, and they're pretty much going to frame it how they want you to hear it. So take the time to go through it, and that's why I'm doing this. So continuing. In several public comments, Mr. Lutsenko also stated that he wished to communicate directly with Attorney General Barr on these matters. The allegations by Mr. Lutsenko came on the eve of the first round of Ukraine's presidential election on 31 March. By that time, Mr. Lutsenko's political patron, President Poroshenko, was trailing Mr. Zelenskyy in the polls and appeared likely to be defeated. Mr. Zelenskyy had made known his desire to replace Mr. Lutsenko as Prosecutor General. On 21 April, Mr. Poroshenko lost the runoff to Mr. Zelenskyy by a landslide. See enclosure for additional information. Continuing, it was also publicly reported that Mr. Giuliani had met on at least 2 occasions with Mr. Lutsenko, once in New York in late January and again in Warsaw in mid-February. In addition, it was publicly reported that Mr. Giuliani had spoken in late 2018 to former Prosecutor General Shokin in a Skype call arranged by 2 associates of Mr. Giuliani. On 25 April, in an interview with Fox News, the president called Mr. Lutsenko's claim, quote, big and, quote, incredible, and stated that the attorney general would, quote, would want to see this, end quote. On or about 29 April, I learned from U.S. officials with direct knowledge of the situation that Ambassador Jovanovic had been suddenly recalled to Washington by senior State Department officials for consultations and would most likely be removed from her position. This would be the ambassador that was mentioned in the phone transcript, never by name, but this is evidently that ambassador, Ambassador Jovanovic. Continuing, around the same time, I also learned from a U.S. official that associates of Mr. Giuliani were trying to make contact with the incoming Zelenskyy team. On 6 May, the State Department announced that Ambassador Jovanovic would be ending her assignment in Kiev, quote, as planned. However, several U.S. officials told me that, in fact, her tour was curtailed because of pressure stemming from Mr. Lutsenko's allegations. Mr. Giuliani subsequently stated in an interview with a Ukrainian journalist published on 14 May that Ambassador Jovanovic was removed because she was part of the efforts against the president. So this is Giuliani making this claim against former Ambassador Jovanovic, quote, was removed because she was part of the efforts against the president. So this is that deep state conspiracy, the argument, let's say, the deep state argument that the president's team is peddling out there saying, look, Donald Trump is trying to drain the swamp doesn't like it, they're fighting back, okay? So this is a continuation of this narrative. Continuing, on 9 May, the New York Times reported that Mr. Giuliani planned to travel to Ukraine to press the Ukrainian government to pursue investigations that would help the president in his 2020 re-election bid. In his multitude of public statements leading up to and in the wake of the publication of this article, Mr. Giuliani confirmed that he was focused on encouraging Ukrainian authorities to pursue investigations into alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 U.S. election and alleged wrongdoing by the Biden family. On the afternoon of 10 May, the president stated in an interview with Politico that he planned to speak with Mr. Giuliani about the trip. A few hours later, Mr. Giuliani publicly canceled his trip, claiming that Mr. Zelenskyy was, quote, surrounded by enemies of the U.S. president and of the United States. So again, that same narrative, there's a deep state, there's something wrong here, was, quote, surrounded by enemies of the U.S. president and of the United States, end quote. Again, that's Mr. Giuliani making this claim, according to the whistleblower. On 11 May, Mr. Lutsenko met for 2 hours with President-elect Zelenskyy, according to a public account given several days later by Mr. Lutsenko. Mr. Lutsenko publicly stated that he had told Mr. Zelenskyy that he wished to remain as Prosecutor General. Starting in mid-May, I heard from multiple U.S. officials that they were deeply concerned by what they viewed as Mr. Giuliani's circumvention of national security decision-making processes to engage with Ukrainian officials and relay messages back and forth between Kiev and the president. So that's an interesting other complaint. Again, Rudy Giuliani is in the middle of all of this. He is in the middle of all of this. Is he acting as the president's personal attorney? According to Mr. Giuliani, yes, he is. Yet you also have Giuliani commingling here. He is in the middle of this. Is he acting as the private attorney to Donald Trump, or is he acting as a government official? That's the problem here. There's going to have to be a lot of answers to these questions. Continuing, these officials also told me the following, that State Department officials, including Ambassadors Volcker and Sondland, had spoken with Mr. Giuliani in an attempt to, quote, contain the damage, end quote, to U.S. national security, and that Ambassadors Volcker and Sondland during this time period, met with members of the new Ukrainian administration and, in addition to discussing policy matters, sought to help Ukrainian leaders understand and respond to the differing messages they were receiving from official U.S. channels on the one hand and from Mr. Giuliani on the other. So again, that's another serious allegation against Mr. Giuliani. So, according to the whistleblower's complaint, we have Ambassadors Volcker and Sondland talking to the new Ukrainian administration, talking about formal U.S. government channels that have a message for the Ukrainians. And on the other hand, you have Mr. Giuliani talking about something that's completely different. Again, this is according to the whistleblower. If that's the case, that is problematic because we have official government business on the one hand, and then you have Donald Trump's personal attorney on the other stating something else, and we don't know all of those details. So again, is this Clinton-esque? Do something with your attorney and just claim attorney-client privilege. That's a serious question because I had big problems with Hillary Clinton, which is why I could not vote for her. This is also something that has that same smell to it as far as I'm concerned at this time. Continuing. During this same time frame, multiple U.S. officials told me that the Ukrainian leadership was led to believe that a meeting or phone call between the president and President Zelenskyy would depend on whether Zelenskyy showed willingness to, quote, play ball on the issues that had been publicly aired by Mr. Lutsenko and Mr. Giuliani. Note, this was the general understanding of the state of affairs as conveyed to me by U.S. officials from late May into early July. I do not know who delivered this message to the Ukrainian leadership or when. See enclosure for additional information. So again, the whistleblower is saying, I do not have firsthand knowledge, but this is what he has been told by various sources. Continuing, shortly after President Zelenskyy's inauguration, it was publicly reported that Mr. Giuliani met with two other Ukrainian officials, Ukraine's special anti-corruption prosecutor, Mr. Nazar Kladanytsky, and a former Ukrainian diplomat named Andrei Telitsenko. Both Mr. Kladanytsky and Mr. Telitsenko are allies of Mr. Lutsenko and made similar allegations in the above-mentioned series of articles in The Hill. On 13 June, the president told ABC's George Stephanopoulos that he would accept damaging information on his political rivals from a foreign government. On 21 June, Mr. Giuliani tweeted, quote, new president of Ukraine still silent on investigation of Ukrainian interference in 2016 and alleged Biden bribery of Poroshenko. Time for leadership and investigation both. Time for leadership and investigate both if you want to purge how Ukraine was abused by Hillary and Clinton people, end quote. So that was a tweet by Mr. Giuliani back in June. In mid-July, I learned of a sudden change of policy with respect to U.S. assistance for Ukraine. See enclosure for additional information. Now, that is the end of the formal complaint by this whistleblower. We don't know this person's identity. There are some stories out that are claiming that this individual is going to be testifying before congressional committees. Will this be public testimony or behind closed doors? We don't know the full details as of this evening, but I'm sure this will be made known as we continue throughout this process. Now, we still have some time here. I think we're going to make it through about another page and a half of the classified appendix. Okay, so part 1 here, additional information related to Section 2. According to multiple White House officials I spoke with, the transcript of the president's call with President Zelenskyy was placed into a computer system managed directly by the National Security Council, the NSC, Director for Intelligence Programs. This is a standalone computer system reserved for code word level intelligence information, such as covert action. According to information I received from White House officials, some officials voiced concerns internally that this would be an abuse of the system and was not consistent with the responsibilities of the Directorate for Intelligence Programs. According to White House officials I spoke with, this was, quote, not the first time under this administration that a presidential transcript was placed into this code word level system solely for the purpose of protecting politically sensitive rather than national security sensitive information. Now, this has been acknowledged by the White House and saying, yeah, we did throw it into this code word level safe box, if you will, because when this administration got started, we were leaking like a sieve. We had phone conversations with the Prime Minister of Australia that was leaked. We can't have this. We're trying to conduct foreign policy. If foreign leaders think that everything that we discuss is going to be leaked, they're not going to want to do business with the United States. They're not going to trust that their communications are going to remain private. So that's a legitimate concern. Will that continue to hold water is going to be, I think, predicated on what else is in these safe boxes. And it's going to be very difficult to get those released because the president will claim executive privilege, national security, because some of the most secure transmissions and information, that's where these things are supposed to be housed. So to think that Adam Schiff and the Congressional, Congress's Intelligence Committee is just going to get these things willy-nilly, it's probably not going to happen, folks. But that's the narrative. We have the whistleblower saying this is unorthodox. You have the White House saying, hey, look, we admit that we're doing this, but that's because there were so many leaks early on in this administration, which was true. Continuing, additional information related to Section 4. I would like to expand upon two issues mentioned in Section 4 that might have a connection with the overall effort to pressure the Ukrainian leadership, as I do not know definitively whether the below-mentioned decisions are connected to the broader efforts I described. I have chosen to include them in the classified annex. If they indeed represent genuine policy deliberations and decisions formulated to advance U.S. foreign policy and national security, one might be able to make a reasonable case that the facts are classified. I learned from U.S. officials that on or around 14 May, the President instructed Vice President Pence to cancel his planned travel to Ukraine to attend President Zelensky's inauguration on 20 May. Secretary of Energy Rick Perry led the delegation instead. According to these officials, it was also, quote, made clear to them that the president did not want to meet with Mr. Zelensky until he saw how Zelensky chose to act in office. I do not know how this guidance was communicated or by whom. I also do not know whether this action was connected with the broader understanding described in the unclassified letter that a meeting or phone call between the president and President Zelensky would depend on whether Zelensky showed willingness to, quote, play ball on the issues that had been publicly aired by Mr. Lutsenko and Mr. Giuliani. So again, this whistleblower is alleging a lot of things that he has no, or she has no firsthand knowledge of. So this gives the Republicans and the president a lot of room to say, look, all you're talking about is a whistleblower. This is all hearsay. This person doesn't know anything. The problem with that, of course, is, and we mentioned this on last week's podcast, what the whistleblower was talking about and described in their formal complaint jibed. It was in agreement with the transcript that was released from the White House. So whoever this individual's sources are, those officials within the White House, they gave this whistleblower information that proved to be accurate. The question becomes how much of the rest of these accusations and questions are also going to prove to be accurate. We don't know, but we do know that the Office of Inspector General said, despite this individual's indicia of political bias, our preliminary review says this is credible. So we're going to have to wait and see. Continuing, on 18 July, an Office of Management and Budget, OMB, official informed departments and agencies that the president earlier that month had issued instructions to suspend all U.S. security assistance to Ukraine. Neither OMB nor the NSC staff knew why this instruction had been issued. During interagency meetings on 23 July and 26 July, OMB officials again stated explicitly that the instruction to suspend this assistance had come directly from the president, but they still were unaware of a policy rationale. As of early August, I heard from U.S. officials that some Ukrainian officials were aware that U.S. aid might be in jeopardy, but I do not know how or why they learned of it. And that's the end of the whistleblower's formal complaint, all four parts and the classified appendix. So we covered a lot of information. I know it's not the easiest thing to grasp all of this with all of the names that are thrown out there, but I wanted to take the time in the name of transparency, in the name of the facts of this case, to go through the entirety of the OIG's memo that was released to Congress and to the public now, and also the whistleblower's formal complaint. Because unless any of you have taken the time to read this, and again, I urge you to do so, a quick Google search, and you can find these documents. You'll get them. Take a read, because you're not going to get this. You're not going to get the whole thing from watching MSNBC or Fox or CNN. You're just not. You're going to get good tidbits of it, and you're going to get some decent analysis maybe here or there. But again, people are getting siloed in. Donald Trump's guilty. Donald Trump's innocent. The Bidens are guilty. Take a deep breath. Let's look for the truth. Let's let this process play out. This is going to be highly divisive for this country, as have so many other things since this president has been elected. Again, this is not the president's doing the cause of this divisiveness. However, I don't believe he has become the quote-unquote national healer. He is not being a uniter. He continues to dig in and fight. He continues with the argument that he is draining the swamp and that the swamp is fighting back. That is a political argument that is going to hold and carry a lot of water with his base. It is consistent with how he has always said he's a counterpuncher, he's a fighter, and he's not going to let these people take him down. Of course, on many previous podcasts, we have said, look, draining the swamp, he hasn't even drained the kiddie pool. So unless there's something really big going on behind the scenes, given what we know publicly, we got $1 trillion deficit. We have an overt coup being staged in Venezuela. We got the saber rattling that continues with Iran. We have a trade war with the Chinese. We were told this was going to be easy to win. It's going on 2 years. There's no end in sight. We've been jerked around. The market manipulation, we talk about that all the time. The military-industrial complex has gotten the big Christmas gift with a big red bow of $2.1+ trillion over the past 3 years. They are the heart and soul of the swamp. So they have been paid. So he wants to say that he's draining the swamp. I haven't seen it. Perhaps behind the scenes something is going on that is going to come out. But again, that could be in agreement with being jerked around with the whole U.S.-China trade war, and that's going to be resolved sometime soon again. But of course, that has been the story for the past, 18 months now. No deal. Okay? So could this be the same exact thing that Donald Trump is continuing with, that he's just holding a nice carrot out there saying, look, there's a conspiracy, I'm going after the deep state, but they're fighting back. It holds water because you want that to be the case, because if there is a deep state, which there is, if there is corruption behind the scenes, which there most definitely is, you want a president or somebody in this government to clean house. That's why a lot of people voted for this guy. We never said it was going to be easy. But what we have seen publicly is not draining the swamp. $1 trillion deficits is not draining the swamp. Giving $2.1 trillion to the military-industrial complex over the past 3 years is not draining the swamp. Okay? Not even close. Are there investigations taking place behind the scenes that are going to come out over the coming months? Let's hope so, because if there's not, we're in a lot of trouble. Because all of this is going to be political grandstanding, and this country is going to tear itself apart because you got a president who's claiming that there's information that needs to be investigated in regards to Biden and the deep state and other Democrats. And on the other hand, you have the Democrats continuing to claw at this president from every single angle. This is not good for the health of this republic. We went through a lot today. We went through a lot for the past few days going through this whistleblower complaint and the OIG's memo and the phone call transcript. I will continue to provide analysis and updates as they are made available. Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you. As always, please like, share, subscribe, and get the word out and leave your comments. I would love to hear from you on all of this because anybody's guess is as good as mine, but let's keep the speculation to a minimum. Let's keep this to as much facts and truth as humanly possible, and I know that's extremely difficult. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.